Hey, good morning everyone. How's it going? So what am I working on now? Well, I'm working on that surf truck, the one with the exhaust leak and stuff like that. I got the wheels off. I got the left side fender liner out. They go that way to get into where the exhaust manifold is. Just much easier doing it this way. Let me just show you real quick. So here, obviously you see the wheels off. The fender liner's out, so the manifold is exposed. If you look towards the back there, you can actually see that. You can see the gasket itself, how it's black on the top there. That's an aftermarket gasket. That's not a factory gasket. The factory would use those sheet metal type gaskets, and those you can reuse. I've never had a problem reusing those. These you can't. So why somebody put these on at some point, who knows? Maybe these are replacement manifolds. Who knows? I have no idea. But I took the plug wires off. I'm going to pull the plugs out. The reason I pull the plugs out is I'd rather be safe than sorry. I don't want to bring the manifold down and hit a plug and snap a plug or crack a plug and not realize it and create a misfire. So I'm going to pull all the plugs out. I'm going to show you a little more in depth on the other side. It's just a little easier for me to film it. One thing, on every single one of these I've ever done, these upper bolts here for where the front pipe meets where the flange is, those nuts that are right there. Every single time I've ever tried to take one off without heating it, what happens is the nut will start to come off and all of a sudden it'll spin and then it'll be stuck on the stud. Every single time without fail. So, I don't care how clean they look. These are definitely not clean. I don't care how clean they look. I actually heat these things up cherry red. If you don't have an oxyacetylene torch, it's fine. Use one of those MAP gas torches that I showed you in other videos. The yellow bottle that you could pick up at Home Depot, Lowe's, wherever. Tractor Supply, I think, even has them. Use that. You can get it hot enough with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this up in the air. Like I said, I'm going to do this side first, and then I'll show you a little more in detail on the other side what I'm doing. It's just because it's too tight in the shop on this side of the vehicle. So for me to film it, it's just a little hokey. So, all right, let me get going with that. Like I said, I'm going to pull the plugs out. I'm going to heat those up, get those nuts off, and then I'm going to pull the manifolds out. All right, let's get going. Now I'm heating these exhaust manifold bolts up where the flange is, cherry red, and I'm still having a problem with them. You can see that one there. It already boogered up the threads coming off, and that thing was cherry, and that one snapped off. And you can see it's discolored because I cherried it. I mean, it started to come out, and all of a sudden it snapped. So like I said, anytime any one of you tries to do one of these things, trust me, put heat on it, because it's going to save you a lot of aggravation. So we got the manifold unbolted. That flange is really hot, so I'm going to wait a few minutes to grab that. But here, the bolts were tight, but you could see this was not sealing. You could see the exhaust blowing out around the gasket. Up front, it was kind of sealing, but that's the reason I'm replacing the manifolds too, because I'd hate to do this job, just put a gasket in it, and then, 2 months down the line, it starts leaking. So with the bolts being tight in that, you know that something's going on there. And I don't know if somebody had the heads off this thing at some point in time or somebody had the motor out of it, but these are not factory gaskets from what I recall. I believe these are like Fel-Pros or something like that. I don't see any stampings on it, but because the GM ones, like I said, they're tin and they have like a part number stamped right into them. All right, let me let this cool down a little bit and then let's get that manifold out of there. One thing you got to be careful of too is that coolant temp sensor right there. Make sure you don't smash that and break that. As that'll cause you a nice headache. So I'm going to disconnect it. I'm going to leave the sensor in place. I'm just going to be careful going around it. But believe me, I've broken one before. So here we have both of the new manifolds. And actually, let me show you something real quick. Where did I put the other manifold? Hang on one second. If you look at the old manifold, see how the flange is here? You look at the new one, see how the flange is with the cuts in it? That helps prevent warping. It also helps prevent the bolts from breaking. I had put a straight edge on this. Let me see if I could show you. And it is warped. I'm not going to put a feeler gauge in it. Hang on a second. Let me grab my straight edge. Now, if you look close, you can see it is warped. And on this end, it's pretty substantial. And this is a machinist straight edge. But anyway, so here's the new ones, and they're from Dorman. You careful with that. That's expensive. Let me just see if I got part numbers on here. Here is the driver's side manifold. And here is the passenger side manifold. Now, remember what I said about getting stuff mail order? Alright, so this is the passenger side manifold. It comes with this donut gasket, which is probably what it takes. And then it comes with this gasket also, because some of them do take this. Now look, this was damaged in shipping. It got caught up underneath the manifold and got bounced around, so it's damaged. Now, had I gotten this mail order, I'd have no recourse. But since I got it from the parts store down the street, I can call them up and say, hey, give me another gasket. They'll give me another gasket. So, I mean, yeah, okay, granted, it's a $10 gasket. But if you got to run to the parts store and buy a $10 gasket, what did you save? You just wasted time going, gas, the whole 9 yards. So, these are all things you have to consider when you're buying aftermarket parts, especially when you buy mail order parts. All right, so we're going to put the studs in this, and we're going to start assembling it. The other thing I wanted to show you is, see how the bolts warped, or these studs warped out, and then see how the threads got all boogered up? And that one just snapped off. But anyway, so the new ones, they do come with the studs that you got to thread in. So I'm going to thread those in. I got to change that gasket. You pick the old one out with a, oh, look at that. That gasket's actually got some damage to it. I just realized that, didn't see that. All right, I'm going to tell them to send me 2 new ones. And yeah. All right, so I'm going to thread those in, and I'll get this thing ready to install. So I actually have the other side all together now. Like I said, I was going to cover the whole thing and go crazy on that. It's just a little tight on that side. I figured I'd just show you a couple of things. But now, on this side, the passenger side, we're going to take the fender liner out. Fender liner has a bunch of 7mm, a bunch of push clips, and all right, somebody's had this fender liner out before, because these holes here, the wiring harness usually pokes through them. It's more prevalent on the driver's side, but I could swear there's some on this side too that's supposed to be there. So let's get those out. There's a 10mm here, so I'm going to take all of those out, and we're going to take the fender liner out. It pops right out. It's very simple. So all the screws, all the push clips are out, and this should just pop out. That's it. It comes out. Here's the harnesses that I was talking about. These push through these holes here. Usually, nobody ever puts them back. So you may be asking yourself, how come I'm changing both sides? Well, I've seen it all too often where change one side and then the other side, like a month later, starts leaking. I don't know why that is, but I've seen it all too often. It's more prevalent on the Chrysler Hemi engines, but anyway, you're there, may as well do them both, get it over and done with. It's not that much more money to do both at the same time, so that's the reason for that. Let's see, anything in particular? No, we're going to take the ignition wires off. This side's a little bit easier than the other side, not by much. This side, you also got to deal with the dipstick tube in the way of that one bolt right there. But it's pretty easy. You just unbolt the dipstick right there, and then usually you can rotate it out of the way or pull it up and out. Usually it's just held in with an, well, it is just held in with an O-ring at the bottom into the oil pan, and it usually comes right out. Yeah, so let's pop the ignition wires off. And I mean, there it is. It's pretty simple. It's just twist the wire and pull it off like that. And then usually I pull it off the coil just so I don't have it dangling in the way. So let me get the rest of those off. And actually, after I got number, whatever that is, 8. I think it's 8. Yeah, that's 8. Once I got 8 off, the last one on that side, see that's carbon from the exhaust leaking out onto it. So yeah, I'm confident that this was either leaking or going to start leaking very soon. So now, before I pull the manifold bolts off up there, I want to pull those nuts off down there. I'm going to have to heat those up and do the same thing as I did on the other side. One thing I did notice, see, somebody's been in here before. I don't know what they did, but the dipstick tube is all loose. The bolt seems tight, so probably the wrong bolt in that hole. And then I want to pull the spark plugs out too. Let me pull that bolt out for the dipstick tube, maybe pop the dipstick tube out. I'm going to want to pull it out anyway, because getting the manifold out otherwise is a little bit of a pain. So, alright, but we're going to work on getting that out too. With the bolt out up there, I just popped it up. I mean, it popped out pretty easy. I don't know if you can see down there. And there we go. Just pull it out. And pull the whole shooting match out. and carefully place it on the floor. Not gonna hurt nothing. Then let's get the spark plugs out, and then let's work on getting those 3 bolts out. 3 nuts, sorry. Now spark plugs are out. One thing I didn't mention is step 1, disconnect your battery. That was the very first thing I did when I pulled it on the lift. Popped the hood, disconnected the battery. The reason being, on this side, here's the power cable, the positive power cable. You undo the manifold, you lift it up and you accidentally drop it, and the shield isn't here, let's say, or whatever, and something touches here, that's a direct arc out. Ground to battery positive. So always disconnect your battery, don't take a chance. Let's see. Now the other thing is, if I'm not mistaken, I gotta take that O2 out, because otherwise you'll never get that nut off. Hopefully that O2 comes out. Doesn't look too happy. Let's see what happens. So that O2 actually broke free with really no effort. This is an O2 socket. This is what it's actually designed for. There's a video out there. It's something about removing an O2 with a hose clamp. It's a little bit on the misleading side. I mean, the guy got over 1 million views with it. But basically it's a socket like this, and what happens, if you look, this socket being like a crow's foot, if you have a O2 that's really stuck in place, this thing can actually spread out and then round over the O2. And what he does is he puts a hose clamp over it to keep tension on it to get the O2 out. And it does work. It does work. And maybe I'll show a separate video on doing that. Oh, Tim Winter, I know you're gonna wonder why I'm using this headlight. The other headlight that you got me works great. However, in a situation like this where I have to look at pinpoint areas, it's a little difficult with that headlight. That headlight works awesome under dashes and in interior areas, or if you're just generally under the hood. But in tight spots like this, I actually prefer this because I can actually focus the beam. That's the reason for this. But I still love the headlight you got me, Tim. Thank you. So now, really all we're going to do is just unscrew this O2, just to have it out of the way. I'm surprised it actually came out nice and clean and quick. So, all right, so we're just going to leave it dangling like that, and now we're going to go underneath and we're going to heat up those nuts, and we're going to get that off of there. So you remember me telling you just a little while ago, make sure you heat those nuts up, because I've seen them where they start to spin down and all of a sudden they just strip and they get stuck on there. Well, guess what? Even though I cherried these, one of them did it. One came off perfectly clean, the other one fought me a little bit, and then this third one, even though it was cherry red, it came down about 1/4 of an inch and then just started spinning. That one there. So now, I gotta get in there and I gotta cut that stud somehow. I think I can get a die grinder in there. Oops, something just fell. I think I can get a die grinder in there, but I'm gonna find out. I'll figure something out. I'll get something in there and cut that. Just, it adds aggravation to the job, that's all. I was able to get in there with a cut-off wheel and I cut it. As you see, I nicked the exhaust pipe just a hair. That's not going to affect anything. I'm not concerned about that. So now we're going to get the bolts out that hold the exhaust manifold in place. They're pretty simple. They're just 13s. That's all it is. And then they'll come right out. The passenger side a little bit easier. Once the bolts are out, it'll snake out this way. All right. So what you want to do is take a razor blade, clean that up. If somebody put aftermarket gaskets like on this one, if you use the factory ones, just take a rag and wipe it. Just make sure there's no edges or anything there that could create a problem. Yeah, so let me do that. Let me get that cleaned up and then ready to go back together. So here with the new manifold, one interesting thing to note. Here's the new gasket that's supposed to go in there. Don't fit. It's too big. But is it too big? That hole is actually too small. Here's the factory one. Same thing. This is actually not big enough. I'm going to have to port this out. Basically, I'm going to have to use like a deburring tool, like a Dremel. And I'm going to have to get in there and open that thing up a little bit. And basically, sandpaper rolls is what we refer to them as. So let me go ahead and let me do that. Let me dig it out. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm not going to show you doing this entire thing, but let me dig that out and show you. Now here's the kit here, and I believe I got this thing off of Amazon. You can get these kits from Summit Racing, Jegs, stuff like that. They're called porting or sanding cones, whatever you want to call them. In fact, I think I might have the Summit kit in my toolbox too. But this one, like I said, I believe I got this off of Amazon. And it just comes with all different sandpaper rolls. And it comes with arbors that you stick into your tool, which is this one. This is an old one that I had. And let me dig one of these out and show you how this goes in. So this is all they are, just these like tubes of sandpaper. And you take it and you stick it on here, and as you can see, it's threaded down there. You stick it down and you actually thread it in a little bit just to like kind of like lock it. And that's it. You know, you can, this is air, obviously you could use electric, whatever will fit that arbor. But anyway, let me see if I have the snap-on kit. Hold on, not the snap-on, the Summit kit. Actually, here it is. SUM G1060 port and polish set. It comes, this is actually just a case. That's all I have left. This is just extra stuff I put inside the case. I've actually had that case since I had my shop, so 1989. So, all right, so let me work this thing out a little bit. Like I said, just basically follow it in there. That's all. It's pretty self-explanatory. So let me get this done. All right, so it's getting there. It's not quite there yet. It's almost there. What I wound up having to do too, wound up having to use one of these. Focus. Use one of these. I can't even think of the name of these things now. Deburring tools. Solid carbide, I believe they are. But I'm using that on there. These things you got to be careful with, because a lot of times when you use these, you get little metal shards that come off, especially if you're doing like sheet metal or mild steel. Like this is cast, so it creates more of like a dust, but it can actually create, which it still is, like actually little tiny flecks, whatever, that can actually get like splinters. And if you've ever got one of those little tiny metal splinters in your finger and it's like you can't find it, it'll drive you insane, because it seems like every time you all of a sudden you touch something, it's like, ah! You know. So you just got to be careful with stuff like that. That's the one bad thing about those, it creates that. The sandpaper one doesn't do that, it just makes dust. So I'm going to go a little more with the solid carbide bit, keep going around, and I'm going to go with the sandpaper some more. Hopefully that thing will fit any second now. So I used a solid carbide in there, and now this thing will fit. I'm just going to use sandpaper to get it a little smoother, but you see the kind of finish that it leaves? You see that? But I use the sandpaper, it'll smooth it out. And see, I didn't go all the way into the very end, but that's fine. This shouldn't be deep enough. You know, it shouldn't be that deep that it goes in there. And here, as you can see those little metal shards wind up on your clothing and everything else. You just got to be careful, like I said, because this stuff gets everywhere. So there you go. I've cleaned it out with the sandpaper roll. I mean, that really wasn't even necessary. It's just I'm a little weird like that, where I like to have everything kind of done the right way if possible. So let me blow this off with some air, and then let's get that seal in there. So if everything was done correctly, this should theoretically just pop in. And it did. Okay. I'm happy with that. So now we got to put the studs in. Let me grab those, and let's see how this is going to work. Because if they don't just thread in with your fingers, like on the other side I didn't show you, they didn't just thread in with my fingers. One did, but the other two didn't. But let me show you a trick in case these don't. Alright, so there we go on the stud. The shouldered end with the short end goes in first. So I've seen people install these with the long end first. That's not how they go. The short end first. Now, that's as far in as they go, and then they come to a stop. The other side, like I said, I had one that actually went all the way in. Take the nuts that come with it, as long as they're not locking nuts, which, hold on. So amazingly enough, these nuts start to screw down and then come to a stop. I don't know if it's something with the threads on the stud itself, because on the other side I was able to thread the nut all the way down. Actually, the studs on the other side were silver. These are black. So, yeah, it's like a slightly different thread. But what I would do is I would take two nuts and put them down together, and what I would actually do is have them like this on there. Then I would tighten them together and then use them to install the stud. So let me try to get this in there and see, because I may actually have to. This is going in kind of tight, which is weird. It's like, I wonder if these are, yeah, those might be those threads. They have, I don't understand the reasoning for the threads, maybe to act like a locker, but if you look really close, you see the threads are kind of like not as defined. See how it's more defined at the very base, and all of a sudden it's not? That's to act like a locker. So let me get a stud installer for this. Let me install these with a stud installer instead. A stud installer instead. Okay. So unfortunately, my old school installer kit, it's basically like a one-way clutch. It's got 3 rollers in it, and there's a bunch of different sizes, and you slide them over, and as you rotate it to tighten, what it does is the rollers kick out, and they're ramped. So they grab the stud and they install them. I'm going to have to install these things with a pair of vice grips just on the very end there. As you see, I took the gasket out for right now because I don't have anything else here to do that. Like I said, I got a funny feeling I put that kit in my storage unit with a whole bunch of other tools that I have. So let me just get these installed now. So basically this is all I'm doing, just down at the very end where the shank is. And I'm doing that to get it installed. And believe it or not, these things are pretty darn tight. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to go in all the way to the end. I'll get it in as far as I can, and we'll go from there. I'm not too worried about them holding. It shouldn't be an issue once it's all the way, or as far in as I can get it. And there you see, I got the studs in. That's about as far as I can get them in, and actually have the vice grip still hold. So I'm not too concerned because it's pretty deep in there, so we're good. So now we're going to take the manifold. This one's a lot heavier for some reason. I don't know why. It's much heavier than the other side. Like I can barely even pick this thing up. The reason I can barely pick it up too is my left hand is not as strong as my right. But we're going to insert this, get this in place, and I'm going to show you a little trick with the gasket. So basically I just inserted it through here. Get it in and lined up. Get those studs kind of in place, because if you don't, you'll jam it all up. So get those kind of in place. As you can see, we're not fully lined up. What I'll do is I'm going to pick this thing up. I'm going to catch the center bolt there to act like a seesaw. And then I'm going to catch the 2 outers. Let me do that, and then let me show you the trick with the gasket. So there, as you see, I have the 2 end bolts hanging out. They're not all the way in. The center one I put in as far as I really could by hand. I didn't want to have it tight, but I put it in as far as I could by hand. And I caught the outer ones. Now, the reason for this, like I said, because I could seesaw it on here, and I want to pull this bolt back out because I'm going to show you the trick. Some of you already know what I'm going to do, but let me get this bolt out and then I'll show you. So now with the gasket ready to go in place, what you do is just snip the bottoms here. This way you can actually lay it in place and drop it over those studs. Pretty simple. Try to do it on the right direction too. I mean, if you look, these bolt holes are center line with the exhaust ports. But if you did it upside down, yeah, it'll work. Yeah, it's going to seal. But the problem is, the top part of the gasket is going to cover the bolt hole for the dipstick tube. So let me just snip these. Just a pair of cutting pliers is all you got to do. Let me see if I can't do this and have you watch at the same time. Just like that. That's it. Let me do the other side. Just like that. You don't have to go nuts. Just a little bit on each side. And I'm not holding the gasket, that's why it didn't come out like ace perfect, but it's fine. Okay, so I'm going to do the other side and then we're going to drop it in place. Here you go, let me just show you real quick. Make sure you have the orientation of these 2 bolts correct too, because you can flip this gasket over and have them backwards. So basically you're just going to take it, that's why you leave those 2 end bolts loose. That's it, let it fall in place. That's good, it's perfect. Now just put all the rest of the bolts in and you're good to go. Now tightening these bolts is just these bolts up. It's just like anything else. Try to do them in a pattern. Don't just go from one end to the other. Now if you noticed, all I did was bottom that one out. I had already tightened up the one just to the side of this. Not tight, but just got it in place. basically till it just bottomed out. Yeah, I got a funny feeling this motor's been replaced, or at least out of the vehicle. Unless it had a DOD issue at one point, which is always a possibility. If you have one of these trucks with DOD, have it turned off. You can have a programmer do that. I know people that have done that and said they haven't noticed a single change in gas mileage. Actually, I've had some people actually say they get better gas mileage. So now we're going to tighten these in order. Just a little bit each one. Until you're done. This cable, this ground cable's in the wrong spot. But whatever, it's not that important. It works. Okay, now those are more than snug, but now I'm going to tighten them. Technically, you could do these three together if you wanted to, because they're separated from the others. I mean, each tube is technically separated from the other. But these two front and two rear share a common flange, or flange point. Oops, sorry about that. Alright, let me just finish this up. And then we are good to put the rest of this back together. I know you can't see that one I'm on. The camera's kind of in my way. Alright, all good. So now let's get the rest of this together. So those nuts are tight on there. Now I get to put that O2 in. And I don't know if that stud is going to interfere. And it won't. It's close, but it won't interfere. Oops, sorry, I didn't realize I was in the way. So I'm going to get that in place. I actually might cut part of that stud off. I think it might be too long because I won't be able to get a socket on there. Let's see, I got the dipstick tube in. It's actually tight now, which it wasn't before. Really no big deal. I pulled the actual dipstick out of the tube just to make my life easier going back in. I'll stick it back in later. Got the plugs in. Just got to put the wires in. So let me just trim that off right there and get the O2 in. Then we can put the fender liner back in and we're pretty much done. I just wanted to show you that. I trimmed that off. I cut that off with a cutoff wheel. Put that in and put a little bit of anti-seize on the threads themselves. Don't splatter the whole thing with it. Let's see, anything else? Got the plug wires on. I gotta put the dipstick in once I get the fender liner in. All right, let's get that done so we can get this thing out of here. Got the battery reconnected, got the dipstick in place. I put the tube in before, just double check everything. Everything looks good. Well, let's start it up. Actually, hold on a second. All right, so let's start this thing up. And it should be quiet, I hope. Yeah, a little bit of belt noise, but no puff, 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 puff. So now when you install new manifolds, you shouldn't have to retorque them. If it was your own car, you may want to check it at your next oil change, and you shouldn't have to retorque them. Also, they're going to smoke a little bit, once they get heated up. Because they do come, with an oil on them. What else? Wow, I had to pause that because I just sneezed. Alright, so that's it. This job well done. I'm happy with how this came out. And it's really not that difficult. Once you get the fender liners out, piece of cake, just go in through the wheel wells. Hopefully you don't have to deal with broken bolts. Alright, that's pretty much it. Hope you're getting something out of my videos. If you already hit that like button, could please subscribe. And also, if you notice at the bottom in the description, I got links to Amazon tools, or tools that are available on Amazon that I personally use, I personally have purchased. Good stuff. So I put that on there because it's good stuff for the home mechanic. So, all right, guys, that's it. Have a great day. Keep wrenching.